Yesterday, February 9, 2026, something happened in West Africa that most global media outlets will struggle to explain, and even harder to ignore. In a move that stunned diplomats, rattled political analysts, and sparked heated debate across the continent, Burkina Faso's transitional parliament made a decision that could permanently alter the political trajectory of the region. In one single vote, swift, decisive, and unanimous, every political party in the country was dissolved. Not suspended, not temporarily restricted, not placed under review, erased. Over 100 registered political parties gone overnight. Decades of multi-party competition wiped off the legal map in a matter of minutes. This wasn't presented as chaos. It wasn't framed as instability. Instead, the government described it as a reconstruction of the state, a reset designed to end what they call a broken political model that divided citizens and weakened national unity. But make no mistake, this decision carries consequences far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Because while international powers continue urging West African nations to restore constitutional order, Burkina Faso has chosen a radically different path, one that openly challenges a Western blueprint for democracy. And whether you agree with it or not, one thing is undeniable. This was not just a policy change, it was a declaration. A declaration that the old political system is over, and a new chapter, controversial and unpredictable, has just begun. What actually happened? Approx. 250 words, here's what unfolded and why it matters. All 69 members of Burkina Faso's Transitional Legislative Assembly voted in favor of a sweeping measure, the complete dissolution of every registered political party in the country. The vote was unanimous, no abstentions, no visible division. Before the military-led transition began, Burkina Faso had more than 100 legally recognized political parties. 15 of them held seats in parliament following the 2020 elections. These parties formed the backbone of the country's multi-party system, competing for influence, shaping legislation, and representing different political ideologies. As of February 9th, that entire structure no longer exists. In one legislative act, the legal status of every political party was revoked. Party leadership positions were nullified. Public funding mechanisms tied to party activity were scrapped. Assets associated with party structures are now subject to state control under the new directive. This was not framed as a temporary suspension pending reform. Officials did not describe it as a pause or emergency measure. Instead, it was presented as a structural overhaul, a decisive break from what authorities argue was a fragmented and dysfunctional political model. Supporters describe it as necessary consolidation during a national transition. Critics view it as the removal of organized political competition. Either way, the impact is undeniable. What existed as a multi-party political landscape one day was, by the next morning, replaced with a completely redefined system. This was not a minor adjustment. It was a full-scale political reset. Government officials are pushing back strongly against claims that this marks the end of democracy in Burkina Faso. According to the transitional leadership, this is not democratic collapse, it is democratic reconstruction. In statements released following the vote, the Interior Ministry argued that political parties had gradually transformed from instruments of representation into engines of division. Instead of strengthening the republic, they allegedly deepened ethnic, regional, and ideological fractures. Instead of promoting accountability, officials claim many parties became vehicles for patronage networks, corruption, and elite competition detached from ordinary citizens. The government's position is clear. The old multi-party framework was not delivering stability, unity, or development. At a time when the country faces serious security challenges and economic pressure, authorities argue that political fragmentation weakened national focus and slowed decisive action. Under the new direction, a fresh legal framework is expected to redefine civic participation and political organization. Party financing mechanisms will be eliminated. The formal designation of leader of the opposition will be scrapped. Structures that once guaranteed state resources to competing political parties will no longer exist. Additionally, Party-owned assets and properties are expected to transfer under state authority, marking a complete institutional break from the previous system. The transitional leadership describes this process as reconstruction, a rebuilding of governance from the foundation up. They insist that national unity and state strength must come before partisan rivalry. Critics, however, see something different. They argue that dissolving organized political competition consolidates power in the hands of the ruling authority and narrows space for dissent. Both interpretations are circulating rapidly. But regardless of where one stands, the scale of the decision is undeniable. This is not a routine reform. It is a moment that will be recorded as historic in Burkina Faso's political timeline. This decision did not happen in isolation. It comes at a particularly sensitive moment for West Africa. Regional bloc, ECOWAS, alongside several Western governments, has repeatedly called on Burkina Faso, as well as Mali and Niger, to restore constitutional order and transition back to civilian-led, multi-party democracy. Diplomatic pressure, sanctions, and public statements have all centered around the same message: return to elections, reinstate political parties, and normalize the traditional democratic framework. Yet Burkina Faso has moved in the opposite direction. Rather than announcing an electoral timetable or reopening space for party competition, the transitional authorities have dismantled the party system altogether. That choice fundamentally shifts the conversation. Instead of asking when elections will happen under the old model, observers are now asking whether that model itself is being rejected. Is this an outright refusal of Western-style multi-party democracy, or is it an attempt to design a different governance structure shaped by domestic priorities, security concerns, and national sovereignty? The answer may define not only Burkina Faso's future, but the broader political trajectory of the Sahel. Now place that development alongside what is unfolding in Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation and often described as the continent's largest democracy. While Burkina Faso has dismantled its party system entirely, Nigeria is preparing for its next general election in 2027. On paper, the country remains firmly committed to multi-party democracy. But the debate currently dominating headlines reveals deeper tensions beneath the surface. At the center of the controversy is one crucial question: how should election results be transmitted? Opposition parties and civil society groups are demanding that electronic transmission of results be made mandatory. Their argument is straightforward. Real-time digital uploading of polling unit results can strengthen transparency, reduce human interference, and increase public confidence in the outcome. The Nigerian Senate, however, recently passed a version of the electoral amendment that permits both manual and electronic transmission. Supporters of this dual approach argue that Nigeria's infrastructure challenges, including uneven internet connectivity and technical limitations in rural areas, require flexibility. They insist that allowing both methods ensures no region is disenfranchised due to technological gaps. Critics see it differently. They argue that leaving the door open for manual collation creates potential loopholes that could undermine transparency. For them, the issue is not just technology, it is trust. Protests have already erupted in Abuja, with opposition figures and activists voicing concerns over electoral integrity. The debate has become symbolic of a broader struggle: whether institutions can guarantee credibility in a deeply competitive political environment. In contrast to Burkina Faso's decisive break, Nigeria's battle is playing out within the existing democratic framework, but with tensions that reveal how fragile confidence in that system can be. What we are witnessing is more than two isolated national stories. It is a broader debate about the future of governance in West Africa. On one side stands Burkina Faso, a country that has chosen to eliminate political parties altogether, arguing that the existing multi-party structure fostered division and inefficiency. Its leadership presents this as a revolutionary reset, a centralized model designed to prioritize unity, security, and state consolidation over partisan competition. Supporters view it as bold and decisive. Critics see it as the narrowing of political space. On the other side is Nigeria, maintaining its multi-party framework, preparing for elections, and working through institutional debates about transparency, legality, and electoral procedures. Rather than dismantling the system, Nigeria is grappling with how to refine it. The focus is not on abolishing parties, but on strengthening or disputing the rules that govern competition between them. These are two very different responses to political pressure, both internal and external. One approach emphasizes centralized authority and structural overhaul. The other emphasizes process, procedure, and electoral continuity. One frames democracy as something that must be rebuilt from the ground up. The other treats democracy as an ongoing system that requires adjustment and reform. Both models face intense scrutiny. Both provoke strong reactions domestically and internationally. And both raise fundamental questions about legitimacy, accountability, and sovereignty. The real debate may not simply be about elections or parties, but about what democracy should look like in practice and who gets to define its terms. Meanwhile, beyond legislation and parliamentary votes, there is another powerful layer to all of this: optics. In international politics, symbolism carries weight. State visits, high-profile invitations, joint press conferences, and carefully staged diplomatic meetings are never just routine formalities, especially when they occur close to major elections. To some observers, these engagements represent normal diplomatic relations between sovereign states. Leaders meet, alliances are discussed, trade and security cooperation continue. In that interpretation, a handshake is simply a handshake, but to others, timing changes everything. When international recognition, royal invitations, or public praise align closely with an upcoming election cycle, critics may interpret those gestures as subtle political signals. They see them not just as diplomacy, but as alignment. Not just protocol, but positioning. Whether that interpretation is accurate or not, perception itself becomes a political force. In democratic systems, public trust often hinges as much on optics as on written law. The image of external approval can shape domestic narratives, influence voter sentiment, and deepen suspicions among opposition groups. In West Africa right now, perception is shaping conversations across borders. Supporters of existing governments may view international engagement as validation and legitimacy. Skeptics may see it as indirect influence or strategic endorsement. The reality is that diplomacy operates in shades of gray. Rarely is it purely ceremonial, and rarely is it openly partisan. But in a region already navigating debates about sovereignty, electoral integrity, and political reform, every photograph, every invitation, and every public statement carries amplified meaning. And sometimes the symbolism speaks louder than policy. Step back from the headlines for a moment, and the deeper issue begins to emerge. This conversation is not just about Burkina Faso dissolving political parties. It is not just about Nigeria debating election procedures. It is about something much bigger. What does sovereignty actually look like in 2026? For decades, the global consensus has largely equated democracy with multi-party elections, regular voting cycles, opposition parties, campaign rallies, televised debates, and peaceful transfers of power. That model has been promoted as the universal benchmark of legitimacy. But today, some governments are openly questioning whether elections alone guarantee stability, unity, or effective governance. They argue that sovereignty is not simply the right to vote. It is the ability of a state to control its security, protect its economy, and chart its own direction without external pressure. That raises uncomfortable but important questions. If citizens begin to lose trust in electoral institutions, if they believe results can be manipulated or that outcomes are predetermined, what happens to the legitimacy of the entire system? Can reforms within the existing framework rebuild confidence? Or do some leaders conclude that a full structural reset is necessary? History shows that when public trust erodes, pressure builds. Sometimes it leads to gradual reform. Other times, it triggers abrupt transformation. West Africa now stands at a crossroads where both paths are visible. Reform, working within established democratic structures to strengthen transparency and accountability, or reset, redefining governance entirely in the name of stability and sovereignty. Which path prevails may shape the political future of the region for years to come. The strategic implications of these developments extend well beyond national borders. The alliance of Sahel states, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, increasingly appears aligned around a governance model that emphasizes centralized authority, security consolidation, and reduced reliance on traditional Western political frameworks. Since forming closer cooperation, these governments have framed their approach as a response to years of instability, insurgency, and what they describe as ineffective external partnerships. Supporters argue that this shift gives them greater room to maneuver. By consolidating authority and redefining political structures, they believe they can focus more directly on security operations, territorial control, and economic self-determination. In their view, minimizing partisan rivalry strengthens state cohesion at a critical time. Critics, however, raise concerns about long-term consequences. They warn that limiting organized political competition may narrow public participation and slow institutional development. Over time, centralized systems can face pressure if mechanisms for accountability and leadership renewal are unclear or restricted. Stability achieved through consolidation must still contend with demands for representation. Meanwhile, Nigeria remains formally embedded within the ECOWAS democratic framework. It continues to operate a multi-party system, independent electoral institutions, and constitutional procedures. Yet, internal debates over transparency, electoral trust, and institutional credibility reveal that remaining within the framework does not eliminate structural challenges. Taken together, these trajectories signal something larger than isolated political reforms. West Africa is witnessing the emergence of competing governance models, one emphasizing centralized reconstruction in the name of sovereignty and security, the other maintaining electoral pluralism while grappling with institutional trust. The outcome of this divergence may influence regional alliances, diplomatic relations, and political evolution for years ahead. So here we are. Burkina Faso says it is rebuilding the state from the ground up. Nigeria says it is refining its democratic process ahead of the next election cycle. Western governments say they are defending constitutional order and democratic norms. But beneath all of these positions lies a more fundamental question, one that goes beyond any single country. Who ultimately decides what constitutional order should look like? Is it defined strictly by multi-party elections and established global standards? Or can nations reinterpret governance structures based on their own security realities, political history, and public sentiment? And perhaps even more importantly, who benefits from whichever system takes shape? Does centralized consolidation deliver stability and sovereignty, or does it risk limiting pluralism and long-term accountability? Can electoral democracies reform themselves fast enough to rebuild trust when institutions face skepticism? West Africa is clearly at a pivotal moment. Different countries are experimenting with different answers to the same challenge: how to balance legitimacy, stability, and independence in a rapidly shifting geopolitical landscape. There are no simple conclusions yet, only unfolding developments that will shape the region's future. So what do you think? Is Burkina Faso carving out a new political path, or entering uncertain territory? Can Nigeria strengthen public confidence in its electoral system before 2027? Let's discuss in the comments. And if you want deeper geopolitical analysis and balanced breakdowns like this, subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one.